The bell above the diner door hadn't chimed in nearly an hour. Chiara moved through the empty space with practiced efficiency, wiping down counters and straightening salt shakers. Her body ached with the familiar tiredness that came from a double shift, but it was the man in the last booth who truly drained her energy. Roman Gallo sat like a king holding court in a realm of scuffed vinyl and formica. She didn't know his name, only his presence, the way the air thickened when he entered, how other customers instinctively avoided looking his direction. He'd been studying papers for 3 hours, his espresso going cold as he made notes in the margins. Every time she approached to refill his cup, she felt his dark eyes track her movements with unsettling intensity. The clock finally showed midnight. Chiara took a steadying breath and approached his booth. "Sir, we're closing now." He didn't look up from his documents. "I'm aware." She hesitated, twisting her rag between her hands. "I need to lock up." This time his eyes lifted, and the direct contact felt like a physical touch. "I'll be leaving shortly. You may begin your closing duties." Retreating to the back hallway, Chiara leaned against the wall and tried to calm her racing heart. The phone call couldn't wait any longer. Her fingers trembled as she dialed her aunt's number, the rotary dial clicking unnaturally loud in the quiet diner. "Zia Rosa? Is everything all right?" she whispered in Italian. Her aunt's voice came through strained and panicked. "They came back, Chiara." Louder this time. They said next time they wouldn't just knock. "Just a few more days," Chiara promised, her throat tight. "I'll have the money, I swear." "But who are these animals?" her aunt cried. "Tell me who would do this to an old woman." Chiara closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool wall. Her aunt needed to understand the gravity of the situation, needed a name to give shape to her fear. The only name that carried the proper weight, the one she'd overheard whispered by men who carried their violence like another limb, slipped from her lips in a desperate whisper. "Laverano per Roman Gallo." The words hung in the air between them, a confession and a warning. Through the crack in the hallway door, she saw the man in the booth still sitting there, perfectly still. Had he heard? No, he couldn't have. She'd spoken too softly in Italian besides. Yet something in the set of his shoulders had changed, a new tension in his posture that hadn't been there moments before. She finished the call with hurried reassurances and returned to the dining area. He was gathering his papers, his movements deliberate and controlled. Without looking at her, he placed a $100 bill on the table, far more than his coffee warranted. "The service was adequate," he said, his voice low and measured. Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Chiara stood frozen, listening to the sound of his footsteps fading into the night. The money felt heavy in her hand, his words echoing in the sudden silence. The rain started as she walked home, a fine mist that clung to her hair and jacket. She was 5 blocks from her apartment when headlights appeared behind her, moving too slowly. A black sedan crept along the street, keeping pace with her hurried steps. When she quickened her pace, the car accelerated, cutting her off at the corner. The door opened and Roman Gallo emerged, his suit jacket dark with rain or blood, she couldn't tell which in the dim light. He moved with a predator's grace despite the obvious pain in his movements. One hand pressed against his side, where a dark stain spread across his white shirt. "You," he said, his voice rough with pain and something darker. "You knew." Chiara backed away until she hit the brick wall behind her. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me." He closed the distance between them, his free hand slamming against the wall beside her head. The ambush was too precise. They knew my route. They knew my timing. "I'm just a waitress," she whispered, trembling as she saw the bloody gash on his side up close. His eyes burned into hers. "You were the only one who knew where I was. And then you whispered my name like a curse." Before she could respond, the sedan's door opened again. A man emerged, older, with kind eyes that didn't match his grim expression. "Roman, we need to go. The police will be here soon." Roman's gaze never left her face. "Bring her." "No, please," Chiara begged as the older man took her arm. "I have nothing to do with this." The man's grip was firm but not cruel. "It's for your own safety now," he said quietly. "If they find out you were involved." She was guided into the car, Roman sliding in beside her. His breathing was labored, his face pale. As the car pulled away, she watched her neighborhood disappear, replaced by streets growing increasingly unfamiliar and opulent. They arrived at a towering building overlooking the river. The elevator carried them to the penthouse in silence. Inside, the apartment was all sharp angles and cold surfaces, a fortress of glass and steel. Roman sank onto a leather sofa while the older man retrieved a medical kit. "Luca, check her for wires," Roman ordered, his voice tight with pain. The older man, Luca, gave her an apologetic look. "It's standard procedure." She stood frozen as he ran a device over her clothing. "I'm just a waitress," she repeated, the words sounding hollow even to her. Roman barked a harsh laugh that turned into a wince. "There's no such thing as just anything in this city. Everyone serves someone." When Luca finished, he turned to Roman. "She's clean. Now let me look at that wound." As Luca worked, Roman watched her with those dark, penetrating eyes. "Who do you work for?" "No one. I work at the diner." Her voice broke. "My aunt, she's in trouble with loan sharks. I was trying to warn her." "Warn her about what?" "About you." The words burst out of her. "I told her the men threatening her work for Roman Gallo. I thought if she knew how dangerous they were, she'd be more careful." The room went utterly still. Even Luca paused his ministrations to stare at her. Roman's expression shifted from anger to something unreadable. "You used my name to scare your aunt?" Tears streamed down her face. "It was stupid, I know. But I was desperate." For the first time, something like understanding flickered in his eyes. He studied her for a long moment, taking in her trembling hands, her tear-streaked face, the cheap waitress uniform stained with his blood. "Luca," he said finally, his voice losing its edge. "Get her something to drink. And find out everything about these loan sharks threatening her aunt." As Luca moved to obey, Roman's gaze returned to her. "It appears we both have enemies to deal with, little waitress. Perhaps we can be of use to each other." The words hung between them, a promise and a threat. Chiara wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold. However this night ended, her old life was over. The whisper had set something in motion that couldn't be stopped, and now she was caught in the current, being pulled toward a destiny she never could have imagined. The silence in the penthouse was a living thing, thick and heavy with unspoken words and the metallic scent of blood. Roman's low groan as Luca finished stitching the gash on his side was the only sound that pierced it. Chiara stood frozen by the floor-to-ceiling window, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, staring at the city lights below but seeing nothing. She was trapped in a diamond-edged cage. "She stays," Roman's voice, rough with pain and exhaustion, cut through the room. It wasn't a request. Luca looked from Roman to Chiara, his kind eyes shadowed with concern. "Roman, is that wise?" "We don't know." "We know she's a target now because of me," Roman interrupted, his dark gaze fixed on Chiara's reflection in the glass. "The Orsino family will connect her to the ambush. It's not safe for her to go back." He shifted, wincing. "There's a guest suite. Luca, you'll ensure she has everything she needs." The word was a mockery. She needed to be anywhere but here. Luca led her down a hushed hallway to a room that took her breath away. It was larger than her entire apartment, decorated in shades of cream and charcoal. "It has an ensuite bathroom," Luca said gently, pointing to a door. "I'll have some clothes sent up. Try to get some rest." The door clicked shut, and Chiara heard the definitive sound of a lock engaging from the outside. Her beautiful prison. The days that followed were a study in surreal tension. Roman, recovering, was a constant, brooding presence. He began to ask her questions, not about the ambush, but about the diner. Who came in? What did they talk about? Did she ever see members of the Orsino family? At first, she answered in monosyllables, terrified. But slowly, she realized he was genuinely listening. She told him about the men with expensive watches who argued in low tones in the back booth, about the deliveries that always happened after hours, about the snippets of conversation she'd overheard about territory and payments. Her waitress's memory, sharpened by years of anticipating needs, provided a mosaic of intel his soldiers had missed. "You see things people forget to hide from the help," he remarked one evening, watching her from his chair as she outlined the Orsino's suspected smuggling routes based on truck patterns she'd observed. "It's hard to be invisible when you're always looking," she replied softly, meeting his gaze for a fleeting second. That night, a storm raged outside, lightning fracturing the sky. Chiara, unable to sleep, wandered into the main living area for a glass of water. Roman was there, silhouetted against the storm, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. The usual guards were absent. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked, his voice a low rumble that competed with the thunder. "The storm," she whispered, turned. In the intermittent flashes of light, he looked less like a king and more like a man, burdened and alone. The space between them crackled with the same energy as the sky. She was acutely aware of her thin nightgown, of the intimacy of the dark, of the few feet that separated her from the most dangerous man she had ever known. "You're not what I expected, Chiara Bellini," he said, closing the distance between them. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a physical force, warming her skin. "And what did you expect?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "A victim. A pawn. Not this quiet strength." His hand came up, his knuckles brushing a stray lock of hair from her cheek. The touch was electric, a jolt that shot straight to her core. "You look at me and you don't see a monster. You see a man." Her breath hitched. "I see both." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Then his head dipped and his mouth found hers. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision, a release of all the pent-up tension, fear, and unspoken attraction that had built between them since he stumbled into her diner. It was fierce and desperate, a battle for dominance and a plea for surrender all at once. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling her closer, while her fingers gripped the front of his shirt, anchoring herself against the tidal wave of sensation. For a breathtaking moment, there was no past, no danger, no lies, only the storm outside and the one they were creating within. Then, as suddenly as it began, it was over. Roman pulled back, his chest heaving, his eyes dark and shuttered. The wall she had watched crumble was rebuilt in an instant, higher and harder than before. "Trust is a weapon," he stated, his voice cold and flat, all trace of the passionate man gone. "And you just showed me yours. Never make that mistake again." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing alone in the dark, her lips still burning from his kiss, her heart aching with a confusion that was far more painful than any fear. The next day, the atmosphere was glacial. Roman was gone before she woke. Luca brought her breakfast, his demeanor unusually stiff. It was hours later when Roman returned. He strode into the room where she was reading, his face a mask of cold fury. In his hand was a cell phone she had never seen before. "Care to explain this?" he snarled, throwing it onto the couch beside her. On the screen was a text message to a number tagged Orsino contact. It read, "He's getting closer. Plans to move against the warehouse on 12th. Needs to be stopped." Chiara's blood ran cold. "That's not mine. I've never seen that phone." "Luca found it hidden in your room," Roman bit out, his eyes chips of black ice. "Was last night part of the act? A distraction?" "No. Roman, please, you have to believe me. I don't have to do anything." He gestured to two guards who entered the room. "Take her to the secure room. And lock the door." As the guards took her arms, Chiara looked over her shoulder, her eyes pleading with Luca. The older man's face was a mask of grim disappointment. But as he turned to follow Roman out, she saw it, the faintest, most fleeting flicker of satisfaction in his eyes before the door to her new, much smaller prison slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. The betrayal was complete. The man she had just kissed had locked her away, and the man she thought was her only friend had put her there. The secure room was a windowless box, a world away from the opulent suite she'd first been given. A single, dim bulb cast long shadows on the bare walls. The only furniture was a narrow cot and a small table. The air was stale and cold. Chiara sat on the edge of the cot, her knees drawn to her chest, the memory of Roman's kiss and subsequent betrayal playing on a cruel, endless loop. Despair was a heavy blanket, threatening to smother her. But beneath the despair, a spark of anger flickered. Luca's face, that fleeting look of satisfaction, was burned into her mind. He had set her up. He was the traitor, and he had used her as the perfect pawn to turn Roman against her. She was trapped, but she wasn't helpless. She had to get a message to Roman. But how? The guards outside her door were Luca's men. Her only hope was the maid, Elena, a quiet, middle-aged woman who cleaned the penthouse. Days earlier, Chiara had found Elena crying in a linen closet, overwhelmed by her son's medical bills. On a whim, Chiara had given her the $100 bill Roman had left at the diner. It was a small gesture, but Elena's gratitude had been profound. Hours passed. The slot in the door slid open, and a tray of food was pushed through. It was Elena. Their eyes met for a brief second through the narrow opening. "Elena," Chiara whispered, her voice urgent. She had spent hours tearing a strip from her bedsheet and writing a message with a sliver of charcoal she'd managed to scrape from a wall. "Please. To Polly. Only Polly." She slid the fabric strip through the slot. She saw Elena's fingers close around it, her eyes wide with fear. The slot snapped shut. It was a desperate gamble. If Elena was loyal to Luca, it was over. Chiara held her breath, listening to the retreating footsteps, praying she had just entrusted her life to the right person. Roman stood in his study, the fabricated cell phone heavy in his hand. The text message stared back at him, a digital accusation. But something was wrong. The timeline. The message was sent at 2:14 a.m. He closed his eyes, picturing the previous night. The storm. Chiara in her nightgown. The kiss. He had left her in the living area at approximately 2:05 a.m. He'd gone straight to his room, the memory of her taste on his lips keeping him awake for another hour. The guest suite where the phone was allegedly found was on the other side of the penthouse. Could she have hidden the phone, returned to the living area, and composed herself so perfectly in under 10 minutes? It was possible, but it felt wrong. It felt staged. And then there was the kiss itself. The raw, unguarded emotion in it. He had felt her surrender, her fear, her desire. It hadn't felt like an act. It had felt real. The thought was a dangerous crack in his armor. A soft knock came at the door. Polly, his most trusted bodyguard, a man built like a bulldog with a face that had seen too many fights, entered. He didn't speak, simply handed Roman a small rolled-up strip of fabric. Roman unfurled it. The message, scrawled in shaky charcoal, was simple. Luca is the traitor. He planted the phone. The maid, Elena, can confirm he was in my room this morning. Please believe me. The air left Roman's lungs. The confirmation he didn't know he needed landed like a physical blow. Luca. His brother in all but blood. The man who had saved his life years ago. The betrayal was a poison spreading through his veins, colder and more painful than any blade. He looked at Polly, whose expression was grim. "You believe her?" Roman asked, his voice hoarse. "I believe in proof," Polly grunted. "And I don't trust the way Luca's been looking at her. Like she's a prize he wants for himself." That was it. The final piece. Jealousy. It wasn't just about power, it was about Chiara. Luca had seen the connection between them from the start and had sought to destroy it. A plan, cold and precise, formed in Roman's mind. He would give Luca exactly what he wanted. Later that evening, Roman staged a performance in the main living area, his voice carrying through the open space. "We're leaving tonight, Polly. The safe house upstate. It's the only place she'll be secure until I deal with the Orsinos. Luca, you're in charge here." He made a show of having a visibly sedated Chiara, a decoy wrapped in a blanket, escorted out by Polly and a team of men. The convoy of black SUVs pulled away from the building with a dramatic roar. The trap was set. From her dark room, Chiara heard the commotion, the shouted orders, the car engines fading. A fresh wave of despair washed over her. He was sending her away. He hadn't believed her note. The penthouse fell into an eerie silence. An hour ticked by. Then, the lock on her door clicked. Luca stood there, a smug, triumphant smile on his face. "Time to go, little waitress. Your brother is waiting." "My brother?" The words were a punch to her gut. Did you really think your family's troubles were just bad luck? Luca chuckled, stepping into the room and grabbing her arm. Nico sent you to that diner for a reason. He knew Roman went there. You were the perfect, innocent bait. It's a shame Roman had to get so attached. It complicated things. He began to pull her from the room. But as they crossed the threshold, a figure emerged from the shadows of the hallway. Roman. He stood perfectly still, his face a granite mask of cold, murderous fury. In his hand was a gun, held steady and aimed directly at Luca's heart. Complicated things for who, Luca? Roman's voice was dangerously quiet. Luca froze, his grip on Chiara tightening painfully. The triumph on his face melted into shock, then hardened into defiance. You were supposed to be gone. I know, Roman said, taking a step forward. You set her up. You tried to use her to destroy me. Why? Why? Luca spat, shoving Chiara aside. She stumbled against the wall, her heart hammering. You have everything. The power, the respect. And then she walks in, a nobody from a diner, and you look at her like she's a queen? After all I've done for you? I've been at your side for 15 years. I saved your life. And now you're trying to end it, Roman replied, his gaze unwavering. Over a woman? It's not just about her. Luca shouted, his composure shattering. It was always supposed to be us. We built this empire together. But you would have given it all up for her, I saw it in your eyes. I couldn't let that happen. The Orsinos made me a better offer. One where I don't play second fiddle to a waitress. The confession hung in the air, ugly and raw. Then, Luca's eyes flicked to Chiara, a cruel smile twisting his lips. But you're right, she is the key. Tell him, Chiara. Tell him who your brother really is. Chiara shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. Fine, I'll tell him, Luca sneered, turning back to Roman. Her brother, Nico, isn't some poor gambler in debt. He's the Orsino's top enforcer. The entire damsel in distress story was a ruse to get her inside your walls. She was their Trojan horse all along. Roman's eyes snapped to Chiara, the gun in his hand never wavering from Luca. The look on his face was one of shattered trust and dawning horror. The final, devastating blow had been struck. The woman he had started to believe in, the woman he had just defended, was she the greatest liar of them all? The silence in the wake of Luca's words was more deafening than any gunshot. Roman's gaze was a physical weight on Chiara, a storm of betrayal and shattered hope. She saw the exact moment the walls around his heart, which had begun to crumble, rebuilt themselves into an impenetrable fortress. He believed Luca. It's not true, she whispered, the words sounding feeble even to her own ears. Roman, please. Is that why you were at the diner? Roman's voice was dangerously low, his fingers still on the trigger, aimed at Luca but his attention fully on her. Was the phone call to your aunt just a performance? No. My aunt is real. Her fear is real. Tears streamed down her face, but she forced her voice to steady, to find the strength that had kept her alive this long. I didn't know, Roman. I swear to you. My brother. Nico, he told me he was in trouble. He said the Orsinos would kill him. He asked me for money, for a place to hide. He used me. The truth of it, the sheer depth of her brother's betrayal, felt like a wound being ripped open. He used my love for our family to get to you. Luca laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. And you fell for it. Both of you. In a movement too fast to follow, Roman shifted his aim and fired. The bullet struck Luca in the shoulder, spinning him around with a cry of pain before he collapsed to the floor, clutching the wound. Polly! Roman barked, his voice echoing in the hall. His loyal bodyguard appeared instantly. Get him out of my sight. Get him to use whatever means necessary. As Polly and another man dragged a cursing Luca away, Roman finally lowered his gun. He walked slowly toward Chiara, who stood trembling against the wall. He stopped mere inches from her, his dark eyes searching hers, looking for the lie. Look at me, he commanded, his voice rough. And tell me you had no part in this. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze without flinching, letting him see every ounce of her pain and fury. I am a victim of my brother, just as you were a victim of yours." She gestured toward the spot where Luca had fallen. "He played us both. He used your trust and my love as weapons against you." For a long, suspended moment, he just stared at her, his jaw clenched. Then, the tension in his shoulders eased, just a fraction. He saw it, not the cunning of a spy, but the devastating wreckage of a woman whose own blood had sold her out. "He'll talk," Roman said, his voice losing its edge. "And then we'll know everything." He didn't lock her back in the room. Instead, he led her to the main living area and poured her a glass of brandy. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold it. The confirmation from a broken Luca came hours later. Every detail she had confessed was true. Nico Bellini was a high-ranking Orsino enforcer, and the plot to use Chiara had been his idea, facilitated by Luca's jealousy. Roman found her still on the sofa, staring into the fire he'd lit in the granite hearth. He sat beside her, the space between them charged with a new, grim understanding. "He's my brother," she said, her voice hollow. "How could he do this?" "Family is the easiest weapon to turn against a man," Roman replied, his own pain over Luca's betrayal lacing his words. "They know where you are soft." He laid out a map on the coffee table. "We end this. But I need your help." She looked from the map to his face, seeing not a mafia boss, but an ally. "A partner. What do you need me to do?" For the next few hours, they planned. Chiara's knowledge of her brother was their greatest asset. She told Roman about Nico's habits, his favorite meeting spots, his arrogance, his tells. She explained how he would never believe she had truly switched sides unless the bait was perfect. They devised a plan for her to contact him, claiming to have escaped Roman's custody and possessing vital information about his operations. They would lure Nico and the Orsino leadership to an abandoned shipyard for a trade. It was a dangerous gamble that required absolute, blind trust between them. The night before the confrontation, the penthouse was a bastion of tense preparation. Men came and went, receiving instructions. Weapons were checked. When they were finally alone, the weight of what was to come settled over them. Chiara stood once more by the window, but this time, she wasn't looking at the city. She was looking at Roman's reflection as he came to stand behind her. "Are you afraid?" he asked, his voice soft. "Terrified," she admitted. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, his touch sending a shiver through her. "I won't let him hurt you." She turned to face him. The raw honesty in his eyes mirrored what she felt in her soul. This was no longer about protection or debt or a business arrangement. The lies had been burned away, leaving only the stark, terrifying truth of what was between them. "I trust you," she whispered. It was all the invitation he needed. This time, their coming together was not a frantic collision, but a slow, deliberate surrender. There were no more walls, no more games. His mouth found hers with a possessiveness that was also a plea, a claiming that was also a gift. Her hands slid beneath his jacket, pushing it from his shoulders, needing to feel the solid warmth of him, to know he was real and he was hers in this moment before the storm. They didn't speak. Words were useless. Their bodies said everything. The touch of his hands on her skin was a language of forgiveness and promise. The way she arched against him was an answer, a granting of every unspoken desire. It was raw and passionate, a fusion of emotional connection and physical needs so intense it felt like a new kind of truth being born. In the quiet of his bedroom, as the city slept below, they found a sanctuary in each other, a desperate, beautiful anchor in the chaos of their lives. The abandoned shipyard was a skeleton of rusted metal and forgotten industry, silhouetted against a dawn sky the color of bruised flesh. A cold wind whipped off the water, carrying the scent of salt and decay. Chiara stood in the center of a wide, concrete lot, exactly as instructed, feeling completely exposed. A black sedan rolled to a stop, its doors swinging open. Nico stepped out, a smirk of triumph on his handsome face. But his smile faded as he saw her standing alone, her posture resolute, not fearful. "You have the information, little sister?" he called out. "I do," she replied, her voice steady, carrying on the wind. Then, the passenger door of the sedan opened again. Nico reached in and pulled out a small, frail figure. Aunt Rosa. The old woman's face was pale with terror, her eyes wide. Nico pressed the cold barrel of a gun to her temple. You chose the wrong side, little sister, Nico snarled, his voice dripping with venomous triumph. Now you can watch her die for it. Time stopped. The world narrowed to the concrete lot, the cold wind, and the terrifying sight of her brother holding a gun to their aunt's head. Chiara's blood ran cold, her carefully rehearsed lines vanishing from her mind. This was a cruelty she had never imagined Nico capable of. Let her go, Nico, Chiara said, her voice surprisingly steady, laced with an authority she didn't know she possessed. This is between you and me. It stopped being between you and me the moment you crawled into a monster's bed, Nico spat, his finger tightening on the trigger. Aunt Rosa whimpered, her eyes pleading with Chiara. You're the monster. Chiara cried, taking a step forward. You used me. You used our family. For what? Money? Power? For respect, he roared, his face contorted. Something you could never understand, serving coffee to scum. The Orsinos saw my value. They gave me a throne, not a stool to wipe clean. From the shadows of the rusted cranes and shipping containers, figures emerged. Roman's men, silent and lethal, moved with practiced precision, surrounding the Orsino soldiers who had accompanied Nico. The standoff was now a powder keg. But Roman was not with them. He was a shadow detaching from a different darkness, moving not toward Nico, but toward a stack of crates that gave him a clear, angled line of sight to Aunt Rosa. His rifle was raised, his eye to the scope. He could take the shot. He could in Nico. But the risk to the terrified old woman was too high. He met Chiara's eyes across the distance. In that single, charged glance, a whole conversation passed between them. I have her. Trust me. Chiara gave an almost imperceptible nod. She turned back to her brother, her heart breaking, but her resolve hardening into diamond. You want respect? She said, her voice cutting through the tension. Then look at me. I am not the scared little sister you left behind. I stood against the wolf and earned his trust while you were groveling at the feet of lesser men. You think this, she gestured to the gun at their aunt's head, is strength? It's the act of a coward. Nico's smirk faltered, his confidence shaken by her defiance. For a fraction of a second, his grip on the gun loosened, his attention fully on her insult. It was all the opening Roman needed. A single, deafening crack split the air. Nico screamed as the bullet tore through his gun hand, the weapon clattering to the concrete. In the same instant, Roman was a blur of motion, closing the distance and pulling a sobbing Aunt Rosa safely into the protective circle of his men. Chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out as the Orsino men, realizing they were trapped, opened fire. Roman shoved Chiara and her aunt behind a steel container, his body shielding them as bullets sparked and ricocheted around them. Stay down, he commanded. But Chiara's eyes were on her brother, who was clutching his bloody hand, scrambling backward. The battle raged around them, but for her, there was only him. The brother who taught her to ride a bike. The brother who now looked at her with pure, undiluted hatred. He lunged for a fallen gun with his good hand. Without thinking, Chiara broke from cover. Chiara, no! Roman yelled. She stood between Roman and her brother, her arms spread. Don't! She screamed at Roman, who had his weapon trained on Nico. She then turned to her brother, tears finally streaming down her face. It's over, Nico. Please, don't make me watch you die. Nico froze, the gun in his hand shaking. He looked from her devastated face to Roman's unwavering aim, to the bodies of his fallen comrades. The fight drained out of him. The gun dropped from his fingers. The shooting stopped as quickly as it began. The Orsino family lay defeated. Nico was roughly apprehended by Polly, his fate now in Roman's hands. But Roman's attention was solely on Chiara. He walked to her, ignoring the carnage around them, and pulled her into his arms. She buried her face in his chest, her body trembling with adrenaline and grief. You saved her, she whispered into his shirt. You saved her instead of taking the shot. I made you a promise, he said simply, his lips against her hair. Weeks later, the city was different. The Orsino threat was erased. Luca was a ghost of a memory. Roman gallows rule was absolute, but it was a quieter, more controlled dominion. The streets were peaceful, the violence that once simmered beneath the surface now gone. In Roman's penthouse, the atmosphere was also different. Lighter. Aunt Rosa, now safe and doted upon by the entire household, had brought a warmth to the cold steel and glass. Roman found Chiara in the library, looking out at the city that was no longer a threat. He stood beside her, a folded piece of paper in his hand. "The city is yours," she said softly. "It's a city," he replied, his gaze on her. "It's stone and glass. It means nothing." He handed her the paper. It was a deed to a beautiful, street-level property in a trendy, artsy neighborhood. It had huge windows and high ceilings. "What is this?" she asked, confused. "It's for your art gallery," he said. "Your dream. Build your life there, Chiara, on your own terms." He took a deep breath, his dark eyes vulnerable. "And if you want, I'll be upstairs, in the apartment above it. If you'll have me." He wasn't commanding her to stay. He was asking her to choose him, to build a life with him. Tears of a different kind filled her eyes. Tears of hope, of a future she never dared to imagine. She didn't need to speak. She reached up, pulled his face down to hers, and kissed him with all the love, trust, and passion that had saved them both. It was her answer. A few months later, the air in the gallery was filled with the soft hum of conversation, the clinking of wine glasses, and the awe-inspired whispers of guests. Chiara's first exhibition, From Shadow to Light, was a triumph. The paintings were bold, emotional, and told a story of fear, betrayal, and ultimately, radiant love. Chiara moved through the crowd, no longer a shy waitress, but a confident artist and business owner. Her eyes, however, constantly sought one person. Roman stood near the entrance, a silent, proud sentinel. He wasn't holding court. He was simply watching her, a soft, private smile on his lips that was reserved for her alone. He wore a suit, but he looked less like a mafia boss and more like a man deeply, contentedly in love. She walked over to him, and he immediately wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close. "You did it, amore mio," he whispered, his voice filled with awe. "We did it," she corrected, leaning her head on his shoulder. They were no longer the mafia boss and the shy waitress. They were Roman and Chiara. Two souls who had been forged in the crucible of fire and betrayal, their trust tested and proven unbreakable. They had faced down their pasts and chosen each other. Their empire wasn't built on fear and territory, but on a love that had been fought for, a partnership that had been earned, and a future they were building together, one beautiful, sun-drenched day at a time. Their forever had begun. We hope you were swept away by the intense, forbidden romance of Roman and Chiara. Their journey from a dangerous whisper to a love that built a new dynasty proves that even in the darkest of worlds, trust and love can create a powerful light. If this story made your heart race, then you need to subscribe and hit that notification bell. We bring you daily romantic adventures filled with passion, plot twists, and heart-stopping moments. From brooding billionaires to fierce protectors, we have a love story for every heart. Let us know in the comments below. Where are you watching from? And what did you think of Roman and Chiara's story? Were you shocked by Luca's betrayal? Did you cheer when Chiara stood up to her brother? We read every single comment and love hearing from our incredible audience. Drop your thoughts and join our community of romance lovers.